I'm your Water for Kit guru. Intel is launching its 10th gen desktop platform, which is called Comet Lake S, and along with that we have the Z490 chipset. I've got 8 motherboards here that support the Z490. You should be able to put your order in for them in about a week's time. This is a preview. I do not have any CPUs yet. The reviews are going to go live in about 3 weeks' time. Another aspect of the fact this is a preview is that I don't have prices. They won't be available until the boards are available for order. But I can make a fairly good guess at the prices. I've got something like £4,000 of motherboards here, would you believe? They're quite expensive. So let's take them one by one and see what Intel's bringing to the party. We're going to start with the Asus ROG Maximus 12 Hero Wi-Fi, partly because Asus only sent us a single board for this preview, and also if we run alphabetically, this is first in line, so it makes perfect sense. Also, I have previously reviewed the Maximus 11 formula with Z390 chipset, and look at the packaging, they're the same, aren't they? But the boards, the Z390 version and the Z490, goodness me, they're very different. The Z390 has an EKWB hybrid block on the VRMs, and the cooling is a significant part of that board. The VRMs themselves, they're okay. In the case of the Z490 version, the Maximus 12, the VRMs, they're built like a tank. It's worth noting the VRM heatsink is not the usual L shape, it is a C shape. It extends around above the graphics slot. Let's just take off this armour. PCI Express support with Z490 is the same as Z390, so we have 2 graphics slots. It's worth mentioning these support both SLI and Crossfire. You'll find many Z490 boards that have dual slots but do not support SLI. And we have 3 M.2s for loads of storage. There we have a heatsink on the chipset. Moving up the board, the 4 memory slots support up to 128 gigabytes of DDR4 4700. I can't see us testing that in a hurry. And then we have the VRMs. And off with the heatsink. Great big slabs of metal, however it does have a decent amount of surface area, and we have a flat heat pipe connecting the 3 together. Here we have the main power delivery. These components would usually go in this location here. Asus has seen fit to move them away from the memory. The VRM controller is the Asus logoed ASP14051, which we believe is an IR35201. That is an 8-phase VRM controller. So the 16 phases here are actually more like a 7+1, except they're 14+2. The stages are by Infineon. They're rated at 60 amps apiece, so we're talking a hefty amount of power delivery for the CPU. On the I/O, we have a good selection of ports and connectors, including, slightly surprisingly, HDMI. Bearing in mind most Intel CPUs are actually APUs. We've got regular USB 2, we've got USB 3, we've got USB 3.1 in my book, or 3.2 Gen 2 if you must. We've got Type C. We have a pair of Ethernet. The Ethernet, one is Intel Gigabit, one is Marvel 5 Gigabit. Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi 6 or AX. Where you might have expected to pay £300 or slightly more for the Maximus 11 with Z390 chipset, we reckon this is going to be about £100 more. Apart from the fact it's new and it's shiny, and we're quite confident Intel's going to charge a premium for Z490. Asus has whacked in a load of extra hardware. The Ethernet's had a raise in its game, so too the Wi-Fi 6, but it's the VRMs. They must be costing a pretty penny. Obviously we can't test the board at the moment, we don't have any CPUs, and if I did test it I couldn't tell you about it, not for about another 3 weeks. Nonetheless, this board is going to be on my list to review, and it looks really interesting. The first of our Gigabyte motherboards is the Z490 Aorus Master. Grey and black colour scheme, looks very X470. It's got a backplate. On the backplate we are advised to dominate in darkness, whatever that might mean. It looks familiar, it has to be said. The box has some interesting claims. We have 90 amp power stages. We have support for PCI Express 4. This is Intel. There's no expectation 10th gen Intel is going to support PCI Express 4 storage. The 11th gen may well. So Gigabyte appears to be telling us to buy this board to support the processor coming presumably next year, 2021. Pricing, we're expecting this board to be priced just under £400. So the Asus is probably 400 to 450, call it 425. This under 400, call it 375. In case Gigabyte's point is not crystal clear, the thinking is that 10th gen Intel Comet Lake S uses the new LGA 1200 socket. The 11th gen Alder Lake is also expected to use the same LGA 1200. 12th gen is expected to leap up to LGA 1700. M.2s to your heart's content. Remove that back plate. The back plate has heat transfer pads that go over these components here on the back of the VRMs. In the I/O shroud, we clearly have some sort of lighting going on. There's the strip there, so presumably it's going to illuminate the logo plate. And now we can see the VRM heatsink. Big orange heat transfer pads, heavily finned, loads of surface area, really good for heat transfer. And the VRMs themselves. The intriguing thing here is that the VRM controller is an ISL 69269. By the look of it, we've got 14 90 amp power stages. Looking at the doubling scheme, you have to assume the controller handles 8 phases, so 7 doubled plus the 1. That's a lot of juice. On the I/O panel, we've got micro buttons for clear CMOS and for flashing the BIOS, Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi AX if you prefer, loads of USB 2, HDMI output, USB 3, USB 3.1 Gen 2 and a Type-C, so we've got 4 of those in total. The Ethernet is Intel 2.5 gigabit. Gigabyte's move to ISL VRMs looks like a brute force move. Loads of ampage, loads of components. If you can keep the price the same, that's pure speculation on our part, but we understand that wouldn't have cost Gigabyte much, if anything, to have changed from international rectifier and to step up to these much higher rated components. Until we can benchmark it, we can't be sure. However, that feels like it should be a very good choice by Gigabyte. Based on their X470 and X570 boards, I'm feeling confident about this. The rest of the board, it's good solid stuff, loads of USB on the I/O panel. Very few bells and whistles. It's basically down to thermals, including that hefty great big backplate. We're expecting the Gigabyte Z490 Aorus Pro AX to cost around the £300 mark. In the context, ooh, haven't peeled off that strip. There we go. Team up, fight on. In the context of Z490 boards, this is relatively speaking a cheap one. In the context of Z390 boards, fairly expensive. If I haven't already said, to my mind, Intel's going to be charging a hefty premium for Z490. The headline features, apart from the obvious LGA 1200 and support for Intel 10th gen, is the alleged PCI Express 4 storage slot with this slightly peculiar sticker, limited functionality check manual. Basically, forget about it for 10th gen, that's what that means. The model name Pro AX refers to Wi-Fi 6 or AX. Those are essentially the new parts. Strip off the storage covers and it's looking incredibly conventional. Dual graphics support, but realistically you're going to put one graphics card in this, and a couple of M.2s below the graphics slots, one above. No backplate. And now we can see the VRM heatsinks in all their glory, and it's a curious thing. So along the top, we've got this slab, which doesn't have a massive amount of surface area, but it does have some. Here we have a finned heatsink. Why one and then one? Why not two of the same? Very curious. And with the heatsinks removed, we can see hardware that's incredibly familiar from Gigabyte's Z390 range. Previously, we saw 12 by 50 amp Dr. Moss stages. Here we have exactly the same 12 by 50 amp Dr. Moss stages. Perhaps the only surprise here is that Gigabyte has stuck with the ISL 69269. On the rear I/O we have a mix of features. So we've got 4 old school USB 2s, we've got the Wi-Fi 6, HDMI out, we've then got 3 each of USB 3.2 Gen 1s and Gen 2s, obviously one's Type C, and we have Intel 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. The Aorus Pro AX demonstrates to my mind that £300 is when you start to get a reasonable list of features, but you're not into the good stuff territory, not by a long chalk. The input outputs, the M.2s, that's all absolutely fine. You've got the Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gigabit and so on and so forth. The VRMs, nah, they're okay, but they're nothing special. Clearly we need to review the board to be absolutely certain, but right now it's looking as though £300 doesn't get you a massive amount for your money. You're going to have to come in close for the Z490 Aorus Ultra. The I stands for ITX, and it's performance ITX at that. You may be surprised to learn this mini ITX board has 2 M.2s, one on the back of the board in the conventional position for mini ITX, the other is under there. If I remove this split block, there is the second M.2. Mini ITX, so we don't have much space to work with. However, Gigabyte's used a backplate and they've used decent VRM heatsinks. Remove those, that's quite a lot of metal. Removing that shroud gives you a good look at what's going on. The M.2 slot is on the back of the board. So we've got full-size DDR4 slots, just as you'd hope to see on a desktop board. Sometimes you see SODIMMs on a mini ITX. The really surprising thing here is the VRMs. This mini ITX board sports an ISL 69269 controller, that controller yet again, and 8 90 amp power phases. We've never seen anything like that on a mini ITX before. Quite remarkable. The I/O panel shows the different use case for mini ITX. So in the middle we've got DisplayPort and HDMI rather than just HDMI. We've got a lot of USBs. So we've got 2 old school USB 2s, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1s, 2 3.2 Gen 2s, one of which is Type C, Intel 2.5 gigabit, and Wi-Fi 6. We think the ITX Aorus Ultra is going to be priced north of £200. I'm hoping it's going to be south of £250. So not cheap, but a decent way of getting a lot of hardware in obviously a very small package at a decent price. The VRMs on this board, really quite surprising the amount of hardware that Gigabyte has packed into this tiny little package. As to how it actually performs, well, I'll find out in a few weeks' time because I'm going to be reviewing this particular model. I'm really looking forward to trying out Intel's new Comet Lake S on ITX. As to whether I go all the way to 10 cores, I think I might. Our fourth and final Gigabyte board is the Z490 Aorus Xtreme WaterForce. I did a build with the Z390 WaterForce and it is just completely over the top. It's the only way of describing it. Pricing, I frankly haven't got a clue. This is a WaterForce version, which means it comes with this whacking great big monoblock, as you see in a moment, version of the Xtreme board. The Xtreme board has to be north of £500, pick a figure, £700, add on a load of hardware. Are we talking £1,000? Are we talking more than that? I don't know. I'm going to say we should price this by the kilo because the water block is 3 kilos. This is 1 and a bit kilos. We've got the Aorus RGB Commander accessory and loads of bits and pieces in the box. So about £200 a kilo. The RGB Commander is as we remember it, so it's got connections for a load of RGB fans. The box also contains a mass of cables. Then we have the huge monoblock which goes this way round. I am not peeling off the protective plastic because I'm not going to be reviewing this board and I imagine they are going to make very few of them. This monoblock weighs in at 3 kilos and has a piece of squidged thermal compound. And then we come to the motherboard itself. The funny thing is because it's designed for that monoblock, it means it's already stripped down. Look at the space behind the I/O. It's quite unusual seeing that because of course there are no VRM heatsinks. And the main news here is ISL hardware throughout. ISL 69269 controller, ISL 99390 power stages, 16 by 90 amps. Where the Z390 used 16 by 60 amps. We're talking 50% more power. You might be concerned that the 3 M.2s will vanish out of sight once the monoblock's in place. However, these parts of the block are removable. As with the X570 Xtreme, the connections are on the edge and they're all down this side. There's nothing on the foot of the board whatsoever. This is an extraordinary form factor to look at, and I never got to play with the X570 Xtreme myself. This is quite out of the ordinary. The rear I/O panel has got everything. Q flash button, clear CMOS, connection points for your Wi-Fi 6, 2 Thunderbolt Type-Cs, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2s, a couple of old school USB 2s, slightly surprised to see there is an HDMI. Networking consists of a Quantia 10 gigabit and Intel 2.5 gigabit, and then we have a pair of USB 3.1 Gen 1s. Even that's not quite the end of the story, as in the huge box of accessories, Gigabyte includes this feature they call Essential USB DAC. There you have it, an audio dongle. It is quite something to see Gigabyte take the lessons they've learned from the X570 Xtreme, add a Z490 chipset, take the WaterForce features I've previously seen, this socking great big water block, and you end up with this. Xtreme is an entirely appropriate name. I imagine Gigabyte is going to make and sell very few Z490 Xtreme WaterForce motherboards. Blimey, it's a piece of hardware. Time for our first MSI, the MEG Z490 Ace. Again, pricing uncertain. I'm going to hazard a guess we're looking at £350. And for that, you get quite a chunk of engineering. The Ace is an understated board. We pull off this shielding here, which is plastic. It has a little connector, so there's obviously some lighting going on in that panel there. That's fine by us. And we pull off the VRM coolers, which are quite solid slabby things. There is some surface area, but we're not talking heavily finned. However, we do have a very small active cooler, which sits just here, just above those USB ports. And that will blow air there. The controller is once again ISL 69269. The stages ISL 99390, so 90 amp stages. It looks to us like a 12+1+4 configuration, which would be 6 with a doubler and a quadrupler. So we have seen a similar setup from MSI in the past, but we need to obviously check how that actually works in operation. On the face of it, that is some battleship engineering going on there. On the foot of the board, we've got micro buttons galore. This is a highly featured board, which is why I'm hazarding a guess the pricing is going to be north of £300. On the rear, we have a mini back plate, but that's obviously for aesthetic purposes rather than doing any cooling of the back of the VRMs or the doublers. On the I/O panel, we have a clear CMOS button, a flash BIOS button, an old school PS2, which should please the overclockers, a pair of USB 2s. We've then got 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1s, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2s, including a Type-C, connections for Wi-Fi 6, and a pair of Ethernets. The Ethernets are unusual because it is Realtek 2.5 gigabit and Intel gigabit. I'll be reviewing the Ace just as soon as Intel coughs up some processors, and I'm going to be fascinated to see whether the ISL VRMs actually require active cooling or not. We've got 2 use cases. Gigabyte has used the same hardware passively cooled. MSI has gone for active. That's going to be a back-to-back to see. The Ace, it's interesting. One of the cheapest boards in this roundup, possibly the cheapest, is the MSI MEG Z490 Gaming Carbon Wi-Fi. Priced, I'm going to hazard a guess, 250 or so pounds, which for Z490 sounds like it's bargain basement. Go back to Z390, sub 200. This is a cheap motherboard. You get no prize for guessing the carbon has carbon highlights. Obviously it's fake carbon, but it looks pretty enough, and there is some RGB going, or illumination at the very least, going on in this panel here. There is no back plate, it's just bare. We have doublers, and then we remove the VRM heat sinks, which once again quite solid. There is some surface area, but very little thinning. And here we have an unusual controller. It's a Renesas RAA 2299001. Not sure we've seen that before. It appears to be an 8-phase controller. We have ISL stages, ISL 99360s once again. The arrangement appears to be 6 doubled, so 6 to 12 plus 1 plus 1. The fact they've mixed and matched controller and stages suggests the emphasis has been on price cutting, which is entirely reasonable. As I say, this is a budget board. Turning to the I/O panel, we've pretty much got the bare minimum of features. So we have an old school PS2, which is a bit of a surprise, 2 USB 2s, a DisplayPort and HDMI, which suggests this PC might be connected to a TV, 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-A's, so that's quite a decent setup in terms of USB. Ethernet is Realtek 2.5 gigabit, and then we've got Wi-Fi 6. The thing about the gaming carbon is that this is the MSI that MSI wants me to review. On the other hand, having seen that Ace, really want to review the Ace. But the fact they want me to review the gaming carbon, that says to me that MSI expects this board to shift by the truckload, probably realistically in conjunction with Core i5, maybe Core i7. After all, that's what people typically buy. They don't go out and buy the 10 core for loads of money. They go down the stack. This is probably the sensible choice when you're buying a Z490 motherboard. We've saved the Z490 Godlike for last. This is the motherboard that Video Cards was recently rumouring was going to be €999, which here in the UK would be, £999. We're fairly confident it's going to be cheaper than that, but maybe not a lot cheaper. If it's around the 750, maybe even 700, that actually makes it relatively competitive at the high end of Z490, surprisingly. Obviously a lot of money, but we are talking super duper high-end hardware. A quick rundown: E80X form factor, monumental levels of shielding over the M.2s. You also get an OLED display, lots of clever bells and whistles. Pull off that I/O shield, which obviously has a connection for more lighting going on there. And we reveal the VRM heatsinks. We've also got a heatsink there over the 10 gigabit Ethernet. You get a lot of accessories with this board, including some braided SATA cables, but of course you won't be using SATA, will you? You'll be using M.2 storage naturally, third slot under there, as you can see. It's a solid piece of work, and then we remove the VRM heatsinks, which are fully finned just the way we like them. This is good. And we have a pair of tiny little fans. They're 25 millimeters. That is the heatsink for the 10 gigabit Ethernet. The thing about these fans is that they sit there. Quite how they are supposed to do anything is a complete puzzle to me. Time will tell if we ever get to review this board. And then we come to the 16-phase VRMs. So the controller, you will not be surprised to hear, ISL 69269. And the stages ISL 99390s. This is clearly the new normal for Z490. For memory support, MSI claims beyond 5000 megahertz, which is a big number. And then if you look down the foot of the board, in addition to the various headers and connectors, you'll see we have a PCI Express power connector to give you extra juice to keep your graphics happy. On the I/O panel, we've got a PS2, a couple of USB 2.0s, 4 USB 3.1 Gen 1s, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2s, which include Thunderbolt on the Type-Cs, Wi-Fi 6, and a full complement of audio. Going around the board, going past the power connector, you can see we've got USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C for a further front panel connection, more fan headers, we've got USB 3.1 Gen 1s there, and we've got a load of SATA. Essentially, there are headers and connectors for absolutely everything. The intriguing thing is, looking at the hardware without the ability to actually run it at the moment, it seems that the Z490 Godlike isn't much of a change from the previous Godlike. They've changed the make and model of the VRMs, but the form factor, the features and so on, they all look quite familiar. It's a super duper high-end E80X motherboard that's going to cost an arm and 2 or 3 legs, but it's nothing new. Nonetheless, it should perform like a champ. That's my preview of the Z490 motherboards. Head over to kitguru.net to read news. Matthew's done a piece about Intel 10th Gen for the desktop. I've also done a piece about these motherboards. Head over to our merch store. You can buy a t-shirt. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell button, subscribe. I'm the Audio for Kit Guru. This was the news launch of Intel 10th Gen for the desktop.